Hello everyone, and welcome to the next in the series of the National Policing Cybersecurity webinar series. For those of you that have been here before, you know that we have to wait at the beginning just for the numbers to start climbing. We have over 100 people registered for today's session. So once we start getting near that number, then we'll actually start the session. So apologies to those that are already online and watching. You're probably going to hear me say that a couple of times. We're probably about halfway to where we expect numbers to be, but I'll keep an eye on that. And as soon as it starts to level out, we'll then start. So for anyone just joining, we are just waiting for numbers to climb. And we're just waiting for Zoom to bring everyone through onto this session. Well, then I'll introduce the session and your options as well during that session. So numbers are still going up. It's taking its time today, but we'll be there soon. We'll be there soon. Okay, so kind of looks like numbers are evening out a bit now. So for all of those that have just joined in, hello and welcome to another session in this National Policing webinar series. Today's session is going to be brought to you by Richard Hasemond from the East Midlands Regional Organised Crime Unit, and is going to be talking to you about cybersecurity in the cloud. But at the end of his session, he's quite happy to take questions from you and address any issues maybe that you've got. So for those of you that haven't used Zoom before, I've been on here, I'm just going to talk you through your options during this session. So just have a look on your screen now, and you'll see down the bottom of the screen, you have a Q&A box and a chat box. So if you click onto the chat box, first of all, you should see a sidebar open up. And on there, it has an introduction to the session and some details about the people speaking in this session now. Down the bottom, you'll see that you've got the option to write a message to either the panelists, so myself or Richard, and also you can select that to all panelists and attendees. Feel free to get involved in a conversation on there, but please remember this is a policing event, and as you'll see by the top of the screen, we are recording, so anything that is put online will stay online forever. So please don't put anything on there that you don't want on there. So then we'll go on to your other option, which is the Q&A box. If you click open the Q&A box, that's where you can type a question in, which will be answered at the end of Richard's presentation. Now, you can choose to answer questions yourself if you feel like you can, but you can also vote a question that is already on there. So the more votes a question gets, the higher up the list it goes. So maybe if one's on there that you want answered, just click the thumbs up button, and there's more chance of that then being answered. So that's it. That's your options today. I'm now going to hand over to Richard, and I hope you all have a great session. Richard.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, my name is Richard Hasemond, and I work for the East Midlands Special Operations Unit, which is just a very fancy way of sort of saying the police. And I've cobbled together a presentation on cybersecurity in the cloud. Hopefully will be very useful if you're a small to medium-sized organization and you're thinking about moving into the cloud, or you're already in the cloud and you want a little bit of kind of security advice and support. But before I kind of kick off with any of that, I wanted to have a look at some interesting factoids. And I think, problem already, my screen is just frozen. Let's just try that one more time. Sorry, bear with me. Here we go. Let's try that again. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you, Richard.
You can hear me. Can you?
And we can see you.
Can you now see the presentation?
Not at the moment. You are not screen sharing.
Okay. I don't have an option to screen share. I think it must have closed down.
Okay. What we'll do whilst we're just quickly waiting for you to sort that, Richard, I'll quickly go through how we can join on to the next event.
Thank you.
Screen share. Bear with me. So, 4 other events in this series. Hopefully you can all see my screen share here. Essentially, if you go to the Eventbrite main page, which is eventbrite.co.uk, and you stick in national policing here, obviously I've already done it, which is why it's come up. Come into here and you will see the list of our events coming up. This one is the one we're in today, but for the next one, which is on Monday, the 18th of May, we've got the Not So Anonymous Hacker. And we will be speaking with Mike Jones, who is a former anonymous hacker. Once it loads, I've got a small bit of loading as I'm hosting this, but if you also go to the bottom of this page and click on the link here, it will bring you into the full series of events. Hopefully, Richard, you've got now sorted the small issues you were having. I'm going to stop sharing at this point, but
thank you. I'll give it a go. I'll press the screen share button and here we go. Let's try that now. So if I put that in presenter mode, can you now see the presentation? Hello?
No, we can't. Not at the moment.
Fantastic. Let's try that.
Stand by. Stand by. Yeah, we have something coming through. We have a list of your slides up now.
Lovely. Are you seeing the presenter mode?
yes, at the moment we've got your main slideshow. So if you start your slideshow at the beginning, and then it should come up.
Okay. Can you see it now?
There we go.
Yes.
Lovely. Sorry about that. So some factoids then about the rise of the cloud. So the worldwide public cloud service market is projected to grow from 182 billion, that was in 2018, to 331 billion by 2022. So really, I mean, this is probably nothing new. The cloud computing market has grown absolutely exponentially in the past few years and is set to continue to rise. And yet security is still a massive issue in the cloud. So, according to our research, 1 in 4 businesses experienced a cyber incident in the cloud in the past 12 months. And perhaps even more kind of alarming, 66% of businesses that were talked to in this survey said that traditional security solutions just don't work in the cloud or have very, very limited functionality. So as well as the cloud market really growing and developing, unfortunately, the security is a real issue for many businesses, and all those kind of traditional methods of protecting your data just don't work. So you really do have to think about your security strategy. So why would anybody even want to kind of like go to a cloud as their main environment? And one of the big reasons for that is because it offers such rapid elasticity. And what I mean by that is that no matter what your hardware and software needs are, you can get them in the cloud. So if you need sort of network capacity, you can have it. If you need sort of like 10 or 20 servers, you can have it. If you need sort of more memory or more processing or more storage, everybody seems to need storage these days, but you can have it as well at a price. So this is a really good thing because, a lot of businesses might be affected by seasonal cycles, and they have peaks and troughs. And one of the questions that a lot of business owners sort of ask is, well, if I buy all this really expensive equipment and expensive software, and my business is kind of like in a trough, I've got those systems kind of sat idle, even though they've cost me a lot of money. Whereas in a cloud environment, those resources can expand and contract depending on how your business changes and the vagaries of your consumer market. So that's one advantage of the cloud. But of course, really supporting that is this idea that you only pay for what you use. Everything is kind of metered. And that kind of gives people, an awful lot of economic efficiencies. One of the really nice things about the cloud as well is that if you do need more storage, or you do need more network capacity, then often you get a web portal, and with a few clicks of the button, you can grant yourself those extra IT resources as and when you need them. Sometimes that can be done automatically too. So again, if your business has experienced a period of growth, then your network can grow with your business, so you have those IT resources to hand. And then all that would happen is that your cloud provider will send you a bill saying these are for the extra services that you've used. Some people like the cloud though, because employees can access your data pretty much on any device, as long as that device has got a browser like Chrome or Internet Explorer or Edge or something like that. Then they can log on and access your resources. The cloud is what we call device agnostic. You could use a mobile phone, you could use a laptop, you could use a souped-up expensive desktop or a stripped-down bare bones kind of computer, or even some sort of iPad. And a lot of employees like that because it reduces their expenditure on technology if their employees can use their own devices. And some people like to use the cloud because it gives them these economies of scale. So many small businesses, many medium-sized organizations don't have too much money to spend on important security tools. Yet a cloud provider can have thousands of customers, and it specializes in providing these IT resources. So, they have the money to invest in top security solutions and to pay for that kind of expert cyber security advice, which smaller companies just can't afford. So the cloud has lots of advantages, and is a good reason why many people would want to use it. So what kind of services are available in the cloud? What can you have? Well, the most basic of service is called infrastructure as a service. And this is like hassle-free hardware acquisition. So you can get network capacity. You can get storage, as much storage as you want. You can get memory. You can get processing power. And the benefit of using a cloud is that you don't have to go out, find out what equipment, what hardware you need, and buy that stuff. And then you don't have to configure all that hardware and sort of look after its physical protection and think about all the expenditures of running that in terms of utilities and power consumption, or sort of environmental controlling with sort of aircon or something like that. The cloud will take care of all that for you. You just purchase or hire the equipment you need. That model of cloud computing will also give you the most control over security as compared with something like platform as a service. Now, in platform as a service, you get all that hardware like you would with infrastructure as a service. That comes. But in addition to that, you often get an operating system slapped onto it. So, for instance, that might be something like Windows. They might dump Windows on all your hardware and say, there you go, use that. Or if you would like, we'd put some sort of Linux distribution on that hardware. And they can do all the configuration of that too, and kind of like harden that platform and deal with all the patches and the upgrading, so you don't need to worry about it. In platform as a service, all you really need to worry about is the software that you put on top of everything. So if you are a financial company and you're using financial software, then you just have to worry about the security of that. Software developers use platform as a service a lot. These are people who will write software and sell it to other companies. They often use this kind of implementation of cloud computing. And then, of course, we have software as a service. And this is the hassle-free, turnkey model of cloud computing that is proving incredibly popular. All you get there is some sort of username and password, and you log in and you're ready to go. All the software that you need is there for you. This is great for people that don't really understand computer networks, or they don't have a network team, and they don't care about networks. They just want to get going. The only problem with software as a service, as of the three models, it offers you the least control over security. And it makes sense too, because you own nothing. You don't own the hardware, you don't own the software, you're hiring its use, and therefore you have no say-so about how they secure that environment, or very little say-so. So that, to me, is a little bit of an issue. And you can see at the bottom of the screen now, I've got a warning, and it's a really important thing to keep in mind. Even though your data is stored in the cloud, you alone are always responsible for its security. So it's, even though your data is stored in the cloud and they own the hardware, they're in control of the security, if there is a data breach, if your customer data gets stolen and posted on the dark web for sale, people will knock on your door and hold you accountable. So we really need to take security in the cloud very seriously, especially if one in a quarter business experiences a cyber incident in the past 12 months. So one of the best things you can do is to sit down and think, what data as a company are we really trying to protect? What information is mission critical, that is so important to us that it would be a disaster if we lost it? And you should list that data down. And it is a little bit of a Herculean task, but it should be attempted. Is this data intellectual property, you know, sort of trade secrets that you have and you don't want to expose? Is this data customer or employee related? For instance, is it the names, addresses, date of birth, national insurance numbers? Is it information about the health of your customers or your employees? Is it credit or debit card information that you're trying to protect and is super sensitive to your organization? Or is it just internal administrative documents that if it kind of got out there on the web, it would be a disaster for you and your companies? A lot of times laws and industry kind of regulations will tell you what data they think is kind of sensitive and what you should look after. And that will help you write that list. But you could easily add 2 more columns to your list. One of those columns could be, how important is that data? How mission critical is it? How sensitive is that data? Is it highly sensitive? Is it kind of medium, or would you rank it as quite low? So to list it and then to sort of say how important each part of that data is. And then you could perhaps add another column in which you think, well, you know, which of our employees or customers needs access to this data, right? And what kind of access, perhaps, do they need? Do they need to be able to just read the information? Do they need to be able to change files and amend it, to print it out, to share it with other people, to export it? What type of access do they need, as well as who needs access to this information? Sometimes it's very useful to think about what information you don't want your employees to see and approach it from that angle as well. Now, this list is really important, and we're going to keep coming back to it during the presentation about how you can secure your operations in a cloud environment. So let's kind of, kind of get the horns of the bull and really tackle this. let's say you want to come out of the cloud. Okay, we've not got into it yet, but let's say we've been using the cloud and we want to get out. Okay, let's think about that for a minute. Well, in a traditional data center, if you have your own IT team and you have computers on site that a team uses, if you want to get rid of your IT equipment, what normally happens is that you send it to some sort of accredited disposal team or organization, and they will take all those hard drives with all that sensitive data that you've got, and they might shred it, or they might incinerate, those kinds of hardware devices. They might zero wipe it, which is to say they will put lots of random data on those disks so that all the sensitive stuff can't be read and can't be retrieved. So there's lots of ways in which they can destroy the data so you can sell that equipment or recycle that equipment. But in a cloud data center, that is not possible. All your precious information that is stored on their disks or their hard drives or whatever it is, and all the memory that uses that data, well, when you leave the cloud environment, they're reallocated or repurposed to other people. So how do you ensure that your data is not on it when they get it, and that your data then doesn't become exposed? They won't destroy those hard drives. They will reuse them. And in fact, even overwriting your data so it becomes meaningless is not possible either, because sometimes your data is completely dispersed throughout the cloud. It could be everywhere because it's continually being backed up and shifted about. So what kinds of assurances do you need when you think about sort of using the cloud for your business? And what you're really after is something called cryptographic erasure. Now, what I mean by that is that you take that list that you've made, all your sensitive data, and then you think those things that are very sensitive and extremely confidential, you need to encrypt that data. And that means it gets scrambled so that if anybody else sees it, they can't make head or tail of it. It's a complete mess. The only person that can unscramble that data, that can decrypt that data, is you, because you will have a special key that will decrypt it. And when you leave the clouds, what you need to do is to destroy that key. And then it doesn't matter if other companies do somehow get access to your data, because it's useless to them, because it's scrambled and encrypted. So you need to talk to the cloud provider about what type of cryptology it might use to preserve the confidentiality of your critical information, even if you leave. Now, this talks, it raises all sorts of interesting questions, because these keys are obviously critical for decryption and encryption. So how do you store these keys? How do you dispose of these keys? You can look after your own keys, which is the most secure thing, but then you need to be fairly technically savvy about how you can look after them and make them accessible for your organization. Alternatively, you can ask the cloud to look after your keys. And then that way, everybody can access the data and read it in a manner that's, quite easy. But then, you really are giving away the keys to the kingdom. So you need a conversation around that issue if you're thinking about moving to the cloud or moving away from the cloud. Another important issue about cloud security is multi-tenancy. So what do I mean by that? Well, in a traditional data center where you have like a server on site and an IT team on site, it's your hardware and your hardware stores your company data on it. It does not store the business down the road. It doesn't store their data, it stores your data. And if you have a really good sort of network team, then all the different departments within a company might be stored on a slightly different area of that network. So just to give an example of that, the finance department's data might reside on one part of the network. Human resources might be on another part of the network. Sales data might be on a third, and the marketing team might be on a fourth. And that's a really good idea, to segregate your network like that, because, you know, if one part of the network gets hit with ransomware or is like compromised, then that infection doesn't spread easily to the rest of your different departments and the rest of your network. It's like not having all your eggs in one basket. In a cloud data center, though, we've got a completely different situation. We've got hundreds and sometimes thousands of customers all sharing the exact same pool of resources. You're all sharing, you know, maybe, or there's lots of users sharing the same hardware. So how do you stop your data leaking into other companies' data? How do you make sure that yours is isolated and protected from other people? So you need some assurances again. And that's where we come back to that list and cryptology. You need to think about what data is super sensitive and mission critical. And you need to make sure that that data is encrypted. And that way, if it does leak into another environment or another customer's kind of field of vision, it's safe. You also want to talk to the cloud provider about how they segment their network. And they might not tell you much here, but they may tell you enough to kind of give you a little bit of assurance that not only will they kind of separate your data, because they can't physically do it. They can't say, right, this hard drive belongs to you, this hard drive belongs to somebody else, and they can't always physically separate it, but they can program, a really clever way, they can program their network to separate that data out. And you want to talk to them how they do that to ensure that not only is your data separated from other countries, companies, but also that your data might be separated between different departments. And that's using technologies called VLANs and VRFs. And you should be able to get a good conversation about that. Because you want to know not only whether they will separate your stuff, but also how do they monitor that separation? How do they test that that separation is working as it should be? Okay, let's go on to the third key issue when we're talking about cloud security, and that's broad network access. So what do I mean by this? Well, in a traditional data center, you hop into your car, you might drive to work, and you sit on a computer and you access the network. The network is normally on site, and normally you are on that computer, and that computer has a cable that physically connects to some server, 100 meters down the corridor or something like that. Or maybe you use Wi-Fi at work and you connect to your server and your network in that way. But in a cloud data center, it's completely different. Everybody is remote working. So, in other words, you are using the internet to access your work and your resources. So, the problem with that is that the internet is untrusted and exposed because the rest of the world is using the internet, not just you. And this is what you're sending your sensitive confidential data down. So you need some assurances about that. But there's also another problem, and that is that all these resources that you have are accessible using lots of different devices. And we quickly talked about that earlier on. So, you know, as an employee, I can access your data on my mobile phone and my iPad or my laptop or my desktop. And what you need to know is that some of these devices that I might use to access your data are not easy to protect. And some of them won't belong to you. They will belong to your employees. And this can be a real security nightmare, a real headache. Hence the title of my next slide, A Boyd Nightmare. Boyd means bring your own device. So it's like somebody working and accessing company data from their own phone or from their own laptop. And it's very popular in the cloud because all you need is that browser to access it. But if I'm using my own device, right, how do you know that it's not being used by other family members or friends? How do you know that my device is password protected or has antivirus to stop it being compromised by a hacker and infecting your data? How do you know that I update this device? And you ask any security professional and they will tell you straight off the bat that the one thing you must do to secure your data, right, is update stuff. Update your hardware, update your software. But how do you know that I'm doing that if I'm using my own device? How do you know that when I connect to your cloud and your data, I'm using a secure online connection and I'm not just using the public Wi-Fi in my local cafe or on a train as I'm traveling? How do you know that my device is encrypted so that your data is safe, that it's tracked? So if I lose it, I can track where it is, and then perhaps I can remotely wipe the data on it. How do you know that I'm not downloading the data onto my device and that is kind of auto syncing to some sort of cloud storage unit, you know, my own cloud storage unit that you have no control over? You might be hemorrhaging data and have no idea that that is happening. And then if I flog and sell my device, my laptop or my mobile to get, you know, 50 quid for it, whatever, how do you know that your data has been removed from it? And these are important questions. So we need some solutions. So how do we protect our data that is traveling over the internet? And how do we solve the problem of people or employees using their own personal devices to access your cloud data? Well, with regards to the first one, you need TLS encryption. Now, I'm not going to get into what TLS encryption is. Suffice to say that when one computer talks to another computer, if you are using TLS encryption, specifically version 1.3, right, anything that you send over the wire is going to be safe. It's not going to be of any use to anybody because it will be totally encrypted. So you need to talk to the cloud provider and ask them if that is possible when you sort of remotely work or remotely access all that information. In the past, we've been using SSL encryption, and that is not quite as secure as TLS. So TLS is definitely the way to go. Another thing that you could do is get a VPN. And you might be sat there going, well, I don't know what a VPN is. Think of it like this. It is a little bit of software, And you can put that software on a phone or on a laptop or on a desktop, and you click on it and open it up. You'll type a username and password in it, and then it's almost as if you're on the company network. You know, you can see all the files and the folders that you would normally see as if you went into work and used those resources. So that's what a VPN will do, and it will kind of encrypt, or can encrypt, that channel of communication too, to give you secure access. So you could talk to the cloud provider about that as well. You might also want to talk to them about IPsec. Now, IPsec is the gold standard of communication and securing communications. Yeah, you know, you can't really get better than that. That gives you end-to-end encryption. So the moment that data leaves your computer all the way to where it's going to, it's completely encrypted and safe. But before you all rush off and say, well, I've got sensitive data, I need IPsec, you need to consider two things. Number one, it really slows things down. So if you have a lot of traffic, it will slow that traffic down. So it might not be viable for you. And number two is IPsec is not installed on any cloud device by default. So you would have to ask for it. And then, of course, you might be paying for a bit of a premium sort of service there. But this is why it's important to make that list of all your essential, most sensitive data, because then you know what needs to be encrypted and perhaps the best way of getting access to that safely. So what about our second problem, which is people using their own personal devices to access your stuff in the clouds? Well, you couldn't just tell them to stop it, and that would work. Don't use a personal device. Of course, that means that you've got to buy them a device that they can work from. Maybe you're going to buy them a company phone. Maybe you're going to supply them with a company laptop. That has big benefits. Yes, it's expensive, but you can really tightly control that laptop. You could give it to your IT team and they can really harden it and make it kind of like secure and safe. So you could do that. The alternative is to invest in mobile device management software, or MDM, mobile device management software. Sometimes you would need to ask for permission from your employees to install that as an app or something like that onto their device. But it brings lots and lots of benefits. For example, it can enforce a password. So whenever they access your data, there's a username and a password that it wants you to input. It can make sure that the device is encrypted to protect your sensitive data. It can push updates or make sure that that device is updated and therefore not vulnerable to all these security flaws and loopholes that can be exploited by an attacker. You can block certain apps because certain apps put that device at risk. You know, in security terms, they might be leaky as a sieve, and you can stop some of those apps being installed with MDM software. And you can separate your data from their data, which is, you know, ideal. You can even remove that data from the device, which is handy if that employee kind of leaves your company and goes elsewhere. You have the assurance that you've got rid of it from any personal devices that may have. MDM, yes, can be a little bit pricey and a little bit expensive, but think about it. You're not buying lots of equipment now for your staff. They're able to remotely work or use their own personal devices, which they have bought, and you know, they are paying for their own data plans, you know, and networking, and they are picking a service that most suits them. So it does have a lot of advantages, not only from a security perspective, but from a business perspective as well. But you can go one step better if you are dealing with very, very critical data or sensitive information. And you can purchase a solution called Information Rights Management Software, which doesn't exactly loll off the tongue, IRM for short. And sometimes this is kind of built in to mobile device management software. Sometimes it's slightly separate. Sometimes it's known as egress filtering. In other words, egress means data coming out. So as data leaves your cloud environment, it's protected. Has lots of different names, but essentially they all do the same thing: policy control. In other words, at a really granular level, you can say, who can read this file? Okay, who can have access to this file and read the data on it? Who can amend it or change it? Who can copy that file? Who can save it to their own desktop or their own machine? Who can print it? Who can forward it? Who can share it? Who can export it? You can control that at a real granular sort of level. You can have different rules for different audiences. So some people can just read it, some people can read it and amend the document and do what they want with it. You can adjust these rules whenever you want to, okay? They're very, very flexible. For example, you can set expiration dates. So in other words, you can let people read the document, and as soon as they've read it, you can wipe it off their systems. Or you can get it off their systems 6 months down the line when you want to get rid of that data. That's really good when you have policies and you don't want people reading older versions of that policy. You just want them to have the most recent edition. So it offers those kinds of controls. And those rules, you don't have to set them up on every single individual file that you create, but you can apply sort of bigger rules to applying those types of policies. You can base them on when the data is made. You can base the rules on where the data, where is it coming from, what was its source, or who created that file. You really do have that granular type of control. It's fantastic for auditing because you can very quickly say who has viewed that data, when did they view it, and from where. So this is very good for demonstrating compliance, especially if you've got tight industry regulations that you have to work with, or there are legislative requirements about how you protect your data and how you monitor its usage. The other good thing, of course, is that IRM works seamlessly with like Office files, spreadsheets and databases and word process documents. It works well with emailing systems as well. So, massive support. IRMs give what we call persistent protection. In other words, all that restrictions and policies about how that data can be used, all those rules follow that data wherever it goes, whether it's sat on the cloud or whether it's kind of delivered to one of your employees' phone or their desktop. That protection always remains, which is a massive benefit of this type of software. But again, you might not use it on all your data because that's pretty intensive. But the sensitive information, that high kind of criticality stuff that you identify on your list is definitely something that you might consider protecting in this manner. What else about the cloud can we talk about? Well, we could look at sort of looking after people's access to your stuff. What do I mean by that? Well, in a traditional data center, you know, in a traditional IT environment, workers have their own accounts, they have their own username, they have their own password, and they log into their own accounts. And those accounts need pretty strong passwords to protect them. In the cloud, this is also true. You need strong passwords to protect that information. But the cloud poses unique risks that you have to think about carefully. So, for example, very early on in the slides, I talked about how fantastic the cloud is in giving you what you need. As your company grows and it needs more IT resources, in the cloud, you can have more hardware, you can have more storage, you can have more processing and memory and a bigger network access. But the problem is as those things grow, you might find that employees suddenly have a lot more access than maybe you wanted them to have. And that's why, like I said at the very beginning, it's important not only to list what is critical, what data is important, but who should have access to those things and how much access they should have in order to do their job, and no more. Okay, just the information they need to do their job and no more. And if you've got that list, when you do click those buttons that give you those additional resources, you have a better idea of who is accessing them, and you can control that in a better way. Account hijacking is a massive, massive problem in the cloud. Cloud providers are big targets for hackers. They're very visible, they're online, you know, they're popular targets. And it's a real worry that somebody will somehow manage to steal an employee's username and password and then get into their account and steal that data because everything is online. So account hijacking is a big threat that we need to think about. And then, of course, the cloud has to manage its own resources. So they employ people. And these people that they employ, some of them will be super users. In other words, they have complete administrative control over that environment. But what happens if their account is breached? It's not just your data that's then at risk. It's every business in that cloud environment. They're all at risk because these employees have such administrative privileges. So how does the cloud employee kind of oversee them? These are all kind of important questions. So you need some assurances. You need to go back to that model about who needs access to what, back to that list of critical data. And then if your network expands, you can keep track more easily of who is seeing what and whether they should or should not have access. Again, you might use multi-factor authentication. Now you might, what's that? So instead of just using, say, a username and a password to log into your cloud account, maybe you need a PIN that's sent to a phone, or a PIN that's sent to like some sort of little electronic device, and we call them tokens. Banks normally give you one of these devices and they send a code to you when you want to access your account. Maybe you have something like that before you can log in, because a hacker, they may get your username, they may get your password, but it's very unlikely that they'll get that PIN sent to the phone or that PIN sent to that little token device. Maybe you have something that you put into your computer that authenticates you, like a little card that you slot in, or you need a thumbprint or palm print or something like that. But that level, that kind of extra step in authenticating will dramatically reduce account hijacking as a problem. You are going to have to train your users. You still need cybersecurity training. How do they look after their accounts and their usernames and their passwords? For example, if they are remote working on the train, you know, are they aware of their surroundings and who might be looking over their shoulder at what they're doing, and also usernames and passwords? You've got to train them not to fall foul of phishing attempts where, you know, people send you emails and you end up downloaded some sort of attachment and infecting your machine, which means now that it's vulnerable and hackers can use it. Or, you know, you're not following a link somewhere where you type in your username and password, and that's then recorded by a hacker who then will use those details. So you do need to think about these issues if you're moving towards sort of the cloud. And also you need to talk to the cloud provider about how it's monitoring these super users, how it's monitoring its kind of its own staff to make sure that everybody's accounts are safe. Okay, so stress and stress testing is the title of my next slide. The cloud environment can experience all sorts of problems, loads and loads and loads of problems. For example, you could have a malicious insider, you know, an employee of the cloud provider who kind of has access to all your data. That would be a nightmare situation. Or you could just have incompetent personnel that they employ that might damage those cloud services and they go down and you don't have access to your cloud environment, which could be a disaster for your company. They have hardware fail on them all the time. They have systems that they need to reconfigure, and that might take that service down when you need it to be up and sort of live. They may be attacked and they may be compromised, and they need to sort those kind of security issues out. So services might temporarily go down for you, and there are lots of different ways in which that can happen. So if you're thinking about a cloud, you're going to need some assurances. You're going to need to do certain things so you can cope, right, if those systems go down. Well, the best way of doing that is to sit down with anyone who really understands your business and say, right, I need another list, right? What are the critical business activities that we do? What's all the essential stuff that we must do to survive, that is mission critical to us? And then once you've got that list of things that need to happen for your business to work, you then need to sit down and say, right, well, how long can I afford to go without that? So if this particular job that we do here goes down, we can't access the cloud to do it, how long can I afford not to do that before it damages my business irreparably? In other words, what is the maximum tolerable downtime that I can experience? We call that the MTD, the maximum tolerable downtime that I can experience without this doing some pretty serious harm. Because once you know what that is, you can have an informed discussion with your provider regarding how they will maintain that level of service. So for instance, they might talk about reservations where you have, you know, you are kind of almost guaranteed some level of service, or shares, which means if they are experiencing a crisis, you will get X amount of service, and you can expect a service that looks a bit like this because it's being divvied up between different users, and some users will have more shares, right, than you do. So you can have those kinds of informed discussions with the cloud provider about what will happen if things go pear-shaped their ends. Sometimes they will talk about what compensations they can offer your business, because, you know, if you can't use the cloud, your customers might suffer, and that might cause all sorts of sort of issues. You might have to sit round and think, right, what workarounds do I need? Because you might go to them and say, listen, I can't cope without this for more than an hour. You know, after an hour, I'm in trouble. It might be 24 hours, it might be a week. But if it's a small time frame when you need that service up and running, and that cloud provider turns around and say, well, we can't promise that, then you need to start thinking about workarounds. Is there some manual way of working that will allow your business to continue while that service is down? Maybe you have to go to another cloud provider and use them as backup. Don't forget, the beauty here is normally you only pay for what you use in the cloud. So it's kind of there ready, but it might not cost you very much in terms of maintaining that alternate provider. So these are good things to think about to give your business resiliency if there is an issue in the cloud.
Richard,
The last topic I want to talk about is
Richard, sorry to just jump in
Yeah.
here. We've got about 4 or 5 minutes left. I'm very aware we have some questions that quite a few
Okay.
people liked. Wondering whether you'd be happy to take those or whether you'd like to continue.
I'd like to take some questions. If I can just grab a quick 2 minutes, I think I can. We're kind of there, really.
Okay, sure. Yeah, we've got about 4 or 5 minutes left for the whole session.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. So very quickly, as I've just been informed, when you own all the equipment, you can study what's called logs, and you can look at these logs to detect malicious activity. Okay, you can find if your systems have been compromised or where there are security threats. In the cloud environments, you won't have access to these logs. They won't give you these logs, or you have severely restricted access to these logs. And the reason for that is because sometimes they reveal important security information about the cloud's infrastructure, so they won't give it you. Nor can you say, right, I'm going to hire a pen tester to scan the cloud and to make sure that all my stuff is safe. They won't let you do that either. So you need to talk to them about what logs can be shared and whether the cloud company has been accredited as cyber safe. And this is a big part of my final slide. In other words, sometimes you have no control over their security, and you can't see a lot of these logs that you need to see if the cloud environment is secure. So in that case, you're relying on a third party to have come into that cloud provider and to have looked at them systems and made a report saying, yeah, they're good to go. Now, when you talk to the cloud provider, are they just giving you vague promises that they are secure? Or can they say, no, our services are validated by a third party? Is that third party qualified? Did the auditor actually appear there and verify those security controls that they are present and working? Or did they just say, no, they are there, they exist? Because there's a difference. And that often comes out depending on the level of service that the cloud has requested. Has the cloud provider done regular penetration tests? In other words, have they tested their systems to find security problems and flaws? Do they assess their cloud against threat models? Now, I don't want to get into Stride and Dread and all these popular threat modeling. Suffice to say, right, that when you use these models, these tools, it really makes you think about how your network might be attacked. Have the cloud providers sat there and thought about all of those ways in which the company could be attacked, and then thought of strategies to defend their network and therefore kind of save your confidential data? And what is the frequency of that testing and validation? Do they do it annually? Do they do it biannually? You know, how many times have they done it? When was the most recent test? Hopefully, they will give you a report, even if it's just a summary of those controls, that will give you the kind of assurances that you need that those controls exist. Okay, so if I end it there, and that gives me like hardly any time to answer questions, which wasn't done on purpose, honestly.
Thanks, Richard. We've got quite a few that have had quite a few likes. So I'll just go in order. So the first one is, given the nature of cloud computing, what are the challenges that cybercrime teams face in regards to digital forensics?
That's a good question. It's huge, because the problem is you can't really go in and start seizing like equipment, because remember, the equipment is shared by other users. So maybe there has been some sort of data breach for one particular company. But if you then go in and start trying to seize equipment, which could be located anywhere in the world as well, so we're crossing over jurisdiction sort of boundaries here, but seizing that equipment might have an impact on other cloud customers. So it's extremely challenging to conduct forensic sort of like examinations in a cloud environment, and it kind of needs to be sort of have some legal backing to it, that there is that kind of right for seizure, or you're depending on the goodwill of the provider to do it kind of for you.
Okay, that's great, thank you. And also, I think you've covered most of this one in your presentation. It's got quite a few likes. So if people put their data in the cloud, what are the most common ways that it would be attacked?
I think, yeah, I mean, like the presentation, there are so many ways in which your data could be attacked. I think the biggest number one concern that you have really is that the cloud environment is shared by hundreds, if not thousands, of customers, and therefore it's critical. It is absolutely critical that you've identified the most important sensitive data that your company deals with, and make sure that that is encrypted within the cloud, and that you know or have a tight control over the key that allows you to unscramble that data. That's important. The other biggest attack really is client side. So it comes from your employees, and that's maybe because their computers or their personal devices has weak security, and someone's gotten hold of their account details or has got a foothold in their device, and then they're kind of piggybacking onto that into the cloud, which is why it's important that security training for them and how they protect their own devices and update it is just as important.
Okay, that's fantastic, thank you. And then finally, I'll ask this last one just because of time constraints. Sure. We have, I'll just read it out how it's written actually. So many of the assurances that you recommend cloud providers to provide are definitely given to large companies, but smaller micro businesses who are using off-the-shelf cloud services don't have the clout to request this information. What do you suggest for off-the-shelf cloud services?
Well, I see what you're saying, but I think they do. I think part of the problem is that smaller businesses perhaps don't have anyone who's well versed in sort of cloud security issues. Often they'll have, data managers who are much used to more traditional environments and security measures of working. But there are two really key reports that you can get. There's a SOC 2 report, and to be honest, it's unlikely that you'll get hold of that. And that is a very, very comprehensive overview of the cloud's security. But to get that, you're going to be signing non-disclosure agreements, and like you say, you need a bit of clout. But they do produce something called a SOC 3 report, and that is normally widely accessible, and you can access it. And that will give you a kind of a synopsis of some of the tools and security measures that they use. And we have to remember as well that cloud computing is a very competitive business, and they don't want to lose customers by saying, I'm not telling you anything. You know, that's not really how they work. They need to keep customers and they need to retain customers. So you should be able to open some form of dialogue by contacting the company. There's normally a cloud broker, and the broker kind of explains procedures and what it might look like, may even offer you a trial kind of like period of using it. And it's important to try and reach out and touch base with these cloud brokers and talk to them about some of the security concerns that you may have. You might find them slightly more helpful than you think. And if they're not helpful, then maybe look to another vendor.
Okay, that's great. Again, fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm just going to start my own video here and come back in. So for anyone that has been watching, we've put some links into the chat box down by the side there that maybe you can go and get some further information from. Obviously, you can contact Richard and his team at the East Midlands Special Operations Unit as well. So as this was said at the beginning, this is part of a whole series. And the next one is going to be real interesting. So we're listening to an ex-member of the anonymous hacking group who's going to be coming on and telling us about his life. So to log on to that series and to book your place at the next one, if you just go onto the Eventbrite page and into the search box there, just type in National Policing, you should see a list come up with our logo as you saw today, and it's the Not So Anonymous Hacker is the one that you want to log into there. That one's on Monday at 2:30. It's not a 2 o'clock start, it's a 2:30 start. So yeah, just go through to that one to book your place on there.
Please could I thank everybody for their time and patience.
Yeah, so absolutely. Thank you for your time, Richard, today, and everyone for logging in. We are going to close this down now. You will be taken through to a request for a feedback form. We would love for you to just fill that out. It's only a few questions. It is part of a series, and obviously we'd love to make them as good as possible. So please tell us what was good, tell us what we could improve on, and hopefully we'll all see you at the next one on Monday. So thanks a lot and take care. Goodbye.